I'm going to try to plow through this last block to give you some, I hope, creative, unique ideas of especially cohort or linked, some projects, some ways that other parishes, there's more of them in the book. There's a whole chapter of best practices and chapter 8. The other thing I wanted to mention in the book was there's also an appendix in there on this issue of expectations and burnout, which in my totally objective, unbiased viewpoint, because I wrote that one, but I think it's well done, and it's true with the research that, if you look at a graph of what are the expectations that we place, and it's not just we as parishioners, but priests place on themselves, as well as diocese with its policies, procedures. It's incredible, the expectations that are placed. And so if you do a graph, the expectations are up here, and then you say, okay, what resources do you have to address those expectations? That's an arrow that goes out this way. And what you have is what I call the stress gap. And there's two ways to close the stress gap. And sometimes you have to sit down with parishioners and help them realign those expectations to lower it. But the other way to close the stress gap is, how do you increase the resources that the pastor has to address those expectations? And that, by calling forth lay talents, gifts, religious, deacons, etc., there's a lot working smarter, creating boundaries. That's another whole course, is to figure out how to get that more in line and manageable. One of the things I like to do with pastors who go from single parish to multiple is to have them describe for me a typical week as they're in a single parish. And of course, most of our priests, and in fact the national research shows that Catholic priests put in more hours per week than any other denominational leader, Protestant, Jewish, etc. God love you, fathers, for that. And one of the things I like to suggest is, without telling anyone, for a month, keep a time log. Because most lay people and leaders really do not know what you do. I mean, have you ever been at a parish council meeting and somebody says, well, why can't Father do 7 masses on weekends? What else does he do? Well, I think to help create better expectations, keep a time log for a month, and at least with your pastoral council, finance council staff, share it with them, so they get an idea of how many times in the middle of the night. They get an idea that, no, it takes more than 15 minutes to bang out a homily. Or it should. Okay. But what I've found is, often when that's shared with lay leadership, sometimes lay leadership says, well, Father, why are you doing that? Isn't that something you could delegate? Or couldn't we look at, with parishes that have resources, hiring or farming that, so that you're free to do the essential core things that you have the gifts and talents to do? So please help our priests to do that. The other exercise I like to do with a new priest who's taking on multiple parishes is, again, describe your week. And then I like to say, okay, now tell me how you're going to cut that week in half, because you're only going to be available half as much. And I get this panic look in their eyes, like, oh my God, I can't do that. You don't have a choice, because you now have 2 children who need to be parented, not just one, without overusing that image. And they're both demanding. Talking of culture and parenting, and those are good images. If you want to learn more about multiple parish pastoring, get together with parents of blended families. They know the challenges of bringing two cultures together, two sets of rituals, two sets of traditions. In my own household, several years ago, my staff gave me a t-shirt that I'm really proud of. And it has two American flags on the sleeves. And on the front, it says, "Proud father of a Peace Corps daughter," which I have. She spent 2.5 years in Zambia, and just a wonderful child. On the back, it says, "Proud father of a Marine Corps son." So I have a son who, spent 4 years in the Marines, came out as a full sergeant. Same family. Very different gifts and personalities, very different ways we had to parent. It's the same thing, pastors in multiple parish situations. What are the unique gifts? What are the unique challenges to help each community grow and understand? We get together, we have phenomenal family gatherings. And it's a great family in my totally objective, unbiased viewpoint. But I think those images are the ones that our pastors and we need to help them cultivate to be effective and to have realistic expectations. So, rolling on, best practices. We're going to talk about branding, random acts, administration, and various ministries. Like everything else, we could do 6 hours on all of this. And evaluation. Branding. Now, this is one you may say, oh my God, that's that business stuff. But it's the marketplace practice of creating a name, symbol, design that identifies and differentiates a product from other products. Okay? What is your cohort's brand? What's important? Remember we talked about mission? And what is it? Can it be captured? Every major business that's effective and successful has a brand. Why don't we? What's the Catholic brand? About the only one we have is the Vatican flag. I'm not sure, especially in our efforts to reach people 40 and under, that that's the most effective brand. Okay? Interesting to me, the Methodist Church. Whenever you drive past it, it's a Methodist church because there's a common brand. How many Catholic churches have you driven past and said, I don't know what faith that is? Okay? Our clusters also brand with a mission statement, we talked about that this morning, or slogan, or a label. So we have things like the Greater Chilton Catholic Community. And everybody and they have a logo that they designed for themselves. And it's a comfort level that it's your brothers and sisters in the neighborhood. I mentioned the West Side Catholic Community with its 4 parishes. There's an identity. There's a comfort, and as they are comfortable with the priest, they become comfortable following him from church to church, or priests. Okay, so branding can be a way to help create that identity, that sense of inclusionist I belong to, and should ideally feel good about. And then when the cohort does something, it needs to make sure its brand is there so people can say, oh, it's that Catholic church that was doing something cool again. I'd like to learn more about it. What can you do within your cohort or linkage or whatever that would make people in the community curious about who are those people and want to learn more about you? Okay? One of my favorites are random acts of kindness. This is evangelization through kindness and can be very effective. In Green Bay, there's a group called Acts 1 or something like that. Have you heard of this? This is an organization, and their sole purpose is to give creative ideas to faith communities. It's non-denominational. And believe it or not, Catholics can learn things from other denominations. I know, it's scary. And they do things like they'll go to a coffee shop, or drive-through coffee, and they'll say, okay, for Sunday morning, anyone who comes here, we're going to pay for their coffee. And people get a little receipt saying, hope you enjoy your cup of coffee. Grace Lutheran wishes you well. Period. Doesn't cost a ton of money, and they do it randomly, so you don't know. They'll go to a gas station, and every time they do this, they get written up in the newspaper. You know, there's a part of me moving towards retirement. I would love to have fun with some of those ideas. And I'm thinking, why aren't we doing any of these kinds of things within the Catholic community? There are, if you Google it, random acts of kindness, you will get literally 20 different websites with ideas. You know, so moving beyond the traditional, let's figure out how to do religious ed or administration, do some things where you have fun. Let the joy of the gospel come out. Here's a couple of the websites that I dug up just taking a quick look. You know, and randomactsofkindness.org, that's hard. Kidspring.org, acts10.org. Okay, some of them I pulled off real quickly just for fun. Positive sticky notes. What if everyone in the parish or the cohort got positive sticky notes that across the bottom said, you know, the South Rutherford Catholic community, and for 1 week you covered the city with positive messages. So as you're walking along, you know, you see a trash can, you write a note, thanks for cleaning up the trash. Stick it on the inside label. You know, you go to a restroom, thanks for keeping this clean. You go wherever you are, you put one of these sticky notes that somebody will stumble across, but always with South Rutherford Catholic community wishes you well. I mean, you would create such a stir. Like, who are those crazy people? Well, they're people who love the gospel and love Christ and want to share it. And we're just doing it in a simple way. The classic cleanup day. Every neighborhood has a couple of eyesores. Well, especially if you've got a cohort, you know, and many people will not volunteer to be on regular ministries or committees. But a special project day, you know, there's the annual volunteer day. How does the Catholic Church participate in that? And especially young adults, if you call them and say, I need you for one morning, and it's a no strings attached, I promise you won't be on a committee, but I need you for the morning because we're going to go clean up, you know, that neighborhood. You usually get great media attention. The people have a sense of accomplishment. You build that pride working together. You begin to build that sense of a greater community. Laundromat quarters. What if, you know, once a week, you know, the church puts a roll of quarters in the local laundromat, and on the outside is, you know, St. John's. Have a good cleanup day. I don't know what you put on, but something creative. Be kind to your server week. Imagine if you got a cohort that said, okay, for the week of, anyone who goes to a restaurant, double the tip and leave a note, you know, the South Rutherford community thanks you for your service and for being the person you are. Very simply, you'll make people saying, well, who are those people? And it just might invite some of that curiosity, evangelization through concept. Amazon Smile. Do you know about Amazon Smile? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, many of you do. That, Most of us use Amazon. If you use Smile, a percentage goes to your local charity. Very simple. School supplies. We do, for our Catholic schools often, we'll do a supplies sale. Know that our public schools are underfunded for the most part, and split the supplies that are gathered. Those schools would be overjoyed. And if you want, have the pencils emblazoned with Saint Hyacinths, something. But plant the seed. Reach beyond. Pope Francis says, go beyond the four walls. Don't stay just within your community. Flowers to nursing homes. How many of you, when you have a funeral, have all these flowers that end up in the trash? What about the health facilities, nursing homes in the area? Is there a way to get them? Leave inscribed books. Do any of you buy the Matthew Kelly books, and distribute them widely? Well, what if, in every coffee house or, a restaurant or waiting room in the laundromat, you left a copy of one of Matthew Kelly's book, and inside the cover said, take it, pass it on, St. Mark's wishes you well. Again, low key, but plants some important seed, and helps communicate and does evangelization light through kindness. Okay? Best practices, administration and organization. Already talked about a business manager. Common software, IT programs. Increasingly, this is a fascinating. The common cluster calendar, through Google Docs. Some of you know what that is. There are very easy ways to maintain a calendar so that you're not planning major events on top of each other. It can be very, very helpful. I am amazed, if you want to have your mind blown, I did just a little bit of research on technology and church ministry. And if you look at church management software, just Google that. The evangelical non-denominational communities are so far ahead of us with the use of technology. And there are software packages that could make, we would have to help pastors and staff, so let's not just pick on staff, pastors, but staff, get over your technophobia. Because if we're going to reach people 40 years old and under, that's where. When we think, us boomer types, about technology, we think, okay, how can we send the message out, hook people, and reel them in, right? That's kind of how we look at using technology. People under 40, there is a digital world which is as real to them as being at the brick and mortar church. We need to look at technology a way of extending the experience of our church community, which is a whole different mindset. And I think it's one which we have a lot of work to do in order to be present too. And if we're not present, the other denominations will be. Because like it or not, we are in a religious marketplace that competes especially for those 40 years old and under. Historically, we could hang out a Catholic shingle and people would just come. People, those days are over. Okay? We can hang out the shingle, but if there isn't something to go with it or a way through the digital world that they can check us out, and that means taking a tour of our facilities without ever walking through the door. And ideally, websites, those are already passé. Facebook, which we all thought, oh, that's the way. My young adults say, well, those are for grandmothers who want to post pictures. Right? And some of you are saying, oh, and I just got a Facebook page last month. And I've already missed it. Well, now it's Snapchat and Instagram and, oh yeah, Yeah, I remember my son, this was already 20 years ago, and I said, well, just send me an email. And he said, oh, Dad, that's so 90s-ish. I had already missed it by 20 years. Okay, we could talk more about that. You know, build the one staff from one side, schedule meetings same time, same place. I know some parishes that have one night each month for Parish Council, Finance Council, and a second night, usually 2 weeks apart, for all parish committees. Again, meet for common prayer. Many of our pastors, key staff, never make it to a worship committee, a social concerns committee, or whatever. But if they're all in the same place, same night, they can drop in, get briefed, offer their wisdom, and move on. Clusters or cohorts can foster the same kind of a dynamic. Together for prayer, announcements, and then separate. Parish picture album, cluster, staff meetings, separate and joint. Again, early on, you want to keep some separate, but increasingly, bring your staffs together. Doesn't all have to happen at once. It's part of that phasing idea. Standardization, whether it's bookkeeping, personnel policies, salaries, benefits, you know, the quicker you can do that, you know, our pastors that have multiple sites just go wild. You know, they go to a parish and it's like, oh, did they use bells here or not? You know, and where am I? And where is the acolyte gonna, or where, for their sanity, the more, now this has to be balanced with the sensitivity to what's unique to each community. But there are many things that we can help standardize that makes life easier for everyone. We talked about the envelopes, common agenda, small successes, communication. This is one I find fascinating, is bulletins. I have seen more blood spilled because it's a symbol of their independence to try to bring together a bulletin. You're better off to let the separate bulletins be for a while, but look at a common newsletter, even if it only comes out once a quarter initially. And if you are going to bring a bulletin together, you have to make sure that on the cover is a picture of each church. And inside the first page is the pastor's comments for all three. And then there's the St. Mary's section, the St. Joe's section. And it sounds like a pain, but trust me, it's worth it because of the negativity you get over the symbol of bulletin. I just find it fascinating. Same thing with social media. To what extent can websites be common with a click? This is just that whole technology and virtual office space. There are accounting programs, volunteer management programs. Anybody using volunteer management software? No. Now that's fascinating. My own parish, there's a software program, and I don't know what the name of it is, for all their liturgical ministries. Oh, yeah. Parish schedule. We use that. Parish schedule. Okay. All right. Okay. But these things are amazing if you're not using them. You know, to be able, I can, you know, get a sub and it automatically goes to, you know, 30 people who have volunteered for the 4 o'clock Mass on Saturdays. Very nice. Supervision via Skype or FaceTime. Now that sounds really odd, but I have pastors with multiple sites who are running themselves ragged to be personally present to staff because somebody told them they have to be present. Well, it's okay if part of the time you check in via Skype, which doesn't cost anything, but at least it's face-to-face. You know, virtual office meetings, you can get the secretaries from all 4 sites on the same screen at once. Okay? Very helpful without people having to spend a lot of time traveling. Now, according to some of the research, you can do about 70% of your supervision via technology. But you do need at least 30% real face-to-face. So don't think of it as a total replacement. Common calendar again. All right. Ministry and leadership training. It is crazy for each parish to have its own lector training program. Catechist training, continuing ed. Social concerns. We do a lot of care ministry training, where we recruit staff people who we train, give the tools, but then continuing ed. That can be done in a common site, that not each parish does its own training. Annual orientation for people on parish councils or finance councils can be done shared. It doesn't have to be done separately. Nope, that is the next one. Catechist, pastoral care. Adult formation. Mixed faith sharing groups. There's the classic Renew. Probably the hottest one right now is Alpha. Is anybody using Alpha? Okay, fascinating kind of phenomena. It was originally developed in the Episcopal Church, and it's an introduction to Scripture and Jesus. It has, received the blessing of key church leaders in the Catholic Church. It's been translated in like 26 languages. Something like 10 million people have made Alpha courses. I just finished my own Alpha group at the diocesan offices. The technology is right on target. You basically have lunch together. You watch a half-hour video, which is extremely well done, and you have an open-ended conversation. And many people have taken significant steps in their faith as a result. There are other programs, packages that are available. Retreats and missions. Do you have Christ Renews His Parish? No? Okay. This one has just been taken over by Matthew Kelly and the Dynamic Catholic, and it's being reworked, and it'll be called Welcome. But you mentioned that you know Curcio, right? Curcio I love, but the problem I have with it is that you leave the parish, you get fired up, and you come back to the parish, and what does the parish do? Knock it off. It's way too faith-filled and high energy. And it squashes it, and so then their community becomes the Altrea, not the parish. Christ Renews His Parish, and you may have other models of that locally, is one where there's a team from the parish who does it for other parishioners. And what they say is they don't want chirpies. That's the shortened term for Christ Renews His Parish. So you can only be on the team twice before you have to move on to some other ministry. So it's continually replenishing, and each time you do a weekend, you keep your eyes open for who you can recruit. Now again, this could be done in a cohort level, not necessarily an individual, so it's still within the neighborhood, and you could get that cross-fertilization. We did Christ Renews His Parish in a situation where they had 5 parishes, that were part of Door County, that situation I talked about earlier. When they started the weekend, everyone described themselves based on their parish of origin or community of origin. They didn't use the Stella Maris, which was the name for the consolidated parish. Halfway through the weekend, because of the trust, naturally somebody said, we keep referring to ourselves as separate, and we're not. And there was this great insight of the Spirit that they were Stella Maris. And some of them worshiped at St. John's, and some of them at St. Camilla's. But it's a way to help build those relationships, create that cohort. It's now going to be called Adult Faith Formation. The mission that you guys set up is a great example of a way to do that. Pulpit swap. Now, I know that each and every one of you priests are incredible. But with all due respects, every weekend, the same one? Once a month, do a pulpit swap, so people get a little different perspective, A little different message. They don't fall into any ruts. I'm very blessed. My pastor is Bishop Morneau, who's an incredible preacher. I mean, he's sought after nationally. But after 10 years, I know most of his stories. And there is a real kind of energy and refreshment that once in a while, there's a help out, somebody. And I think, again, to help foster that sense of the cohort, periodically, a pulpit swap is not a bad idea. It also means that as pastor, you can tell the stories you've been saying for 10 years with a new group of people. So there's a lot of advantages to that. Anyhow, rotating your major celebrations we talked about, Sacrament liturgy coordinator at sites, the Inter-Parish worship committee, or the Inter-Parish choir. If you've ever been part of a parish choir, one of the things you love is to sing in a bigger choral group. Okay? And this is one of the best ways to get people out of their community of origin to be part of, for major celebrations, a bigger choir. Where you can then bring in some brass and other instruments, and it's a wonderful opportunity for some key events in the cohort. Use of rituals. I mentioned earlier the idea of covenant. One parish that was bringing together 6 parishes into one canonical parish, they went to the local, I think it was community center, which had this huge facility that they used for conferences and trade shows. And the key ritual was a procession in, and they processed in with water from the baptismal fonts of all 6 parishes. And so the opening was a sprinkling rite with the water being poured together, and then a sprinkling rite. These are the kinds of we are a people of symbol. How can we use symbol to touch people's hearts and communicate a deeper, more profound reality? Common worship aids, shared youth ministry, confirmation, sponsor couples, shared RCIA. Interesting one. Many parishes struggle with their RCIA. There are some things that have to be parish specific, so you maintain that rootedness, but some things where there's the energy and you can bring in a little higher level speaker or whatever by sharing. Create some new traditions. Don't stay in your ruts. Is there a new fundraiser for, well, I'll give you an example. One of my other responsibilities in Green Bay is 2 parishes in the Dominican Republic. And there's one of our diocesan priests there. It's on the border with Haiti. And we also have 90 small communities associated with these 2 parishes. We had a project that we came up with to build chapels in like 40 of the larger small communities. And what we did was that we invited parishes or clusters or linkages to do fundraisers to raise, when we did this, it was about 10, 15 years ago, it cost between $5,000 and $6,000 for the building materials. The local community build it themselves. And the community back here gets that sense of personal satisfaction of seeing this chapel and this community celebrating Mass and it being blessed. And again, that sense of pride, we made a difference in somebody's life. Okay? There are other opportunities like that, but you do it via a fundraiser, which sometimes you're amazed. I know parishes are amazed. They say, well, they do education for a couple of weeks and they say, okay, at the end of the week or end of the month, we're going to do a collection. Please come with your checkbooks. This is what we hope to accomplish. Many times, communities exceed their targets because it's concrete, it's tangible, and again, you get the pictures back. We do not encourage the communities to go down there because we want to empower the local communities, and some of our communities, out of their sense of goodwill, overdo it. You know, and they actually will take, so anyhow, another set of issues. Evaluation. Annually, part of your process is an annual evaluation. So each May, correct? There'll be kind of a, how we doing? And it's a good time to check in. Take a step back, you know, it's from the activity and fill out those forms. There's many methods. Key question I always like is, what has the experience been? Not on a scale of 1 to 10, how'd you do, but what's the experience? How have we touched hearts and souls? And then second question is always, as we look to the future, what advice do you have? If you ask people what's wrong, they won't tell you, because they're too nice and charitable. But if you ask them, what advice do you have, they'll tell you what's wrong. It's just part of, it's key how you phrase the question to get the input you need to continue to stretch and grow. Long term, embrace change. Again, there's a handout. Don't look at it now because there's no time to. But for you to be successful, this comes from Zeck and Miller's book, and they have 12 criteria. You know, you'll know you're successful 3-5 years from now if the community embraces change, if you have a sense of priorities, if people share information freely, that there isn't the guardedness, if the cultures do some melding, if you have an identity, the roles and responsibilities are clear. Right now in your cohorts, you have a group of chiefs. Okay, so that can be a challenge until some roles and responsibilities evolve naturally. Teamwork thrives, that it isn't just one parish doing all the work, that you can achieve, as the bishop called for, stewardship, better cost savings. You've got alignment, there's results. That stuff above the water matches with what's going below the water, and you're still flexible and alive. So longer range, parishes strengthen, pastoral needs, and some of these criteria are also addressed. So, branding, random acts, administration, ministries, evaluation. That's it. It's time for me to turn it over to Terry, and thank you very much for listening.